I was halfway down the hallway when I heard my name, and something in the tone stopped me cold. Nina's sweet, but you know Lila has always had more drive. I froze outside the kitchen door, the summer air from the back patio, drifting in with the smell of barbecue and fresh cut grass. Inside, my mother's voice carried like silk-wrapped steel. You need someone who will challenge you, Daniel. Someone with ambition. Not someone who spends her days painting sunsets and chasing feelings. I could barely breathe. My boyfriend, Daniel, was in that room. The same Daniel I'd dated for 3 years. The one I thought I'd marry. He'd gone to grab us drinks from the kitchen during my sister's graduation party, and I'd followed a minute later, wondering what was taking so long. Now I wished I hadn't. She's always been a dreamer, Margaret, Daniel said, his voice low. But I love her. Do you? There was a pause. I pressed my back to the wall, willing the conversation to end. Instead, it twisted deeper. Love is important, my mother said gently, but it isn't everything. You want a future, don't you? Something solid? Lila just made junior partner at one of the most prestigious firms in Charlotte. Nina still lives in a studio filled with unfinished canvases. Think long term. I couldn't see them, but I could picture her placing a hand on his arm the way she always did. Warm, motherly, persuasive. She's not going to be able to build with you, Daniel, my mother continued. Not like Lila can. And be honest, haven't you felt that too? The silence was louder than anything else. When Daniel finally spoke, it wasn't a protest. It was a sigh, a thoughtful one. Maybe I just didn't want to admit it. That's when I left, quietly, without a word. I walked back through the garden, past my cousins laughing by the pool, past the twinkle lights my father had strung up in the trees. I smiled when people waved, hugged Lila when she approached me with a glow of achievement on her perfect face. I stayed until the party ended, but something inside me had already broken. Over the next few weeks, the cracks spread fast. Daniel started talking about Lila in little ways, how confident she was during her graduation speech, how cool it was that she'd already landed clients. I laughed it off, pretending it didn't sting. But then came the canceled dates, the vague texts, the nights he said he was too tired to talk but was tagged in someone's Instagram story at a downtown wine bar. I confronted him once. He said they ran into each other downtown. Had lunch. She's your sister, Nina. It'd be weird if we didn't get along. I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. But I knew. The next dinner at my parents' house, I watched them across the table. Lila's hand brushing his wrist when she laughed. His eyes drifting to her when he thought no one was looking. My own mother, smiling like she'd already set a wedding date. It wasn't just betrayal. It was a theft of my relationship, my future, and worst of all, the belief that family would never do this. You're being dramatic, Jessie said, my best friend since high school, after another dinner ended with Daniel leaving early and Lila offering to give him a ride. No, I whispered. I think I'm being replaced. Jessie didn't laugh. She just looked at me for a long time, then said, You deserve someone who doesn't need convincing to love you. I should have left. Should have packed my things and walked away before the final blow. But I stayed, maybe out of fear, maybe because I still hoped I was wrong. That hope shattered 3 months later. It was a Tuesday. I'd bought 2 tickets to a band Daniel loved, one of those indie folk groups he always said he wanted to see live. I decided to surprise him. I still had a key. We'd been talking about moving in together before everything. His apartment was quiet. I called out, got no answer. Then I saw the trail, his jacket, her heels, a silk scarf I recognized from Lila's Instagram. The bedroom door wasn't fully shut. I heard her laugh first, and then the unmistakable creak of the mattress. The soft, low sound of his voice. I don't remember opening the door. I just remember the way Lila's hair looked spilling across his chest, the way their bodies tensed when I dropped the envelope of tickets onto the hardwood floor. They scattered like confetti. Nina, Daniel started, grabbing for a shirt. Lila didn't flinch. She just pulled the covers over her chest and rolled her eyes. Well, this is awkward. Don't, I said. Don't lie. Don't explain. Just don't. He stood there, mouth open, guilt already turning to excuses. I'm sorry, he said finally. It didn't mean to happen like this. How long? There was a pause. 2 months. Officially. Since Mom talked to you? I asked. The way they looked at each other confirmed everything. I didn't scream, didn't cry. I just walked out and drove home. The tears came later, but not as loud sobs. They came in waves of silence, of not recognizing myself in the mirror, of standing in my studio, looking at unfinished paintings and wondering if anything I built had ever been real. The next day, I went to my mother's house. She was arranging flowers. Don't be so dramatic, Nina, she said, as if I were a child throwing a tantrum. Relationships end. You'll find someone who suits you better. You did this. She glanced up. I did what needed to be done. Lila deserves a partner who can match her ambition. And I don't. You're softer, a dreamer. You'll find someone who fits that. I nodded. Then I left. I packed everything I could fit into my hatchback, my art supplies, my portfolio, a duffel bag of clothes, and a folder labeled Chicago. I left a note on the kitchen table. For my mother, for Lila, for Daniel. 3 words, nothing more. Watch me thrive. It was still dark when I crossed the North Carolina border, the mountains shrinking behind me as I headed west toward a city where no one knew my name. Denver wasn't some grand, strategic choice. It was where my art school roommate had once moved to chase her own version of reinvention. She'd said it was the kind of city where people came to begin again. That was all I needed to hear. The motel room I checked into smelled faintly of bleach and something older. Cigarettes, maybe. The walls were thin. The air conditioning rattled. But it was mine. For the first time in months, no one knew where I was. And that anonymity was strangely comforting. I gave myself 5 minutes. 5 minutes to sit on the edge of the bed, face in hands, letting it all fall apart. 5 minutes to cry, to rage, to feel like a fool for trusting people who had never really seen me. Then I opened my laptop. The job hunt was brutal. Most places didn't want someone with a fine arts degree and no corporate experience. I went on interviews for barista jobs, gallery assistants, anything. My savings, never large to begin with, dwindled fast. I found a studio apartment in a building that hadn't been updated since the 70s, the kind where the elevator creaked like a haunted house and the radiator hissed in its sleep. But it had 4 walls, and a lock, and a window that looked out over a used bookstore and a noodle shop. That was enough. I made a rule. Apply to at least 5 jobs a day, no matter how exhausted I felt. I hung a whiteboard in the kitchen and wrote it out in marker. You are not broken. You are becoming. 3 weeks later, I got a call from Meridian Capital Group. The woman on the phone said the admin assistant position had been filled, but they had another opening. An executive assistant to one of their junior investment associates. She said he needed someone organized, quick on their feet, and able to deal with a little chaos. I said yes before she even finished the sentence. That's how I met Julian Hart. He didn't look like the finance guys I'd imagined. No slick back hair or expensive cufflinks. Just a button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows, a face in need of sleep, and a desk buried under reports and takeout boxes. When I walked in, he looked up and blinked like he hadn't seen daylight in days. Sorry about the mess, he said, gesturing to a chair. I'm Julian. Nina Callahan, I replied, smoothing down the thrift store blouse I'd ironed 3 times that morning. I'm told you need an assistant who knows how to navigate controlled disasters. A smile ghosted across his face. That's accurate. The interview was short. He barely glanced at my resume before asking, why an art major? Why apply here? I could have lied, said I was looking for stability, or that I'd always been fascinated by markets. but something in his exhaustion made me honest. Because I had to leave everything behind, I said quietly. And I'm starting over. I need a job. I learn fast. I work harder than most people. I don't quit. He studied me for a moment, like he was seeing something under the surface. I get that, he said finally. I've started over too. He offered me the job that afternoon. My first week was a blur of color-coded calendars, last-minute coffee runs, and trying to decode Julian's scribbled notes on Post-its. He was smart, brilliant even, but completely disorganized. I built him a system in a week. He remembered to eat lunch. He stopped losing client notes. He started saying thank you. Late one evening, I found myself still at the office, sorting through investor files by risk category. Julian looked up from his laptop and blinked. Why are you still here? I glanced at the clock. 11:02 p.m. Because the work isn't done, I said simply. He didn't argue. Over the next few weeks, something shifted. We started having lunch together, not out of obligation, but because we genuinely enjoyed the break. He told me about his father, a contractor who disapproved of his money games, and about growing up in a household where ambition was survival. I told him little bits about Asheville, about painting, about losing things you thought were forever. You're a mystery, he said one afternoon over banh mi sandwiches. Most people talk endlessly about themselves. You deflect. Maybe I'm just boring. He shook his head, not even a little. We didn't flirt. Not really. But there was something unspoken, a respect, a curiosity, a quiet pulse building between the hours and coffee runs and the shared silence of two people who had both been broken once and were now learning how to build again. One night, as I was locking up his office, he handed me a folder. What's this? A business plan, he said. Something I've been working on for years. I want to start something of my own, something real. I think you should be part of it. I blinked. Julian, I'm just your assistant. No, he said, voice low but certain. You're the person who makes things work. And in that moment, for the first time in a long time, I believed him. Starting a business sounded glamorous on paper. In reality, it was building IKEA desks at midnight in a one-bedroom apartment, calculating burn rates with grocery store receipts, and answering emails from the couch because the dining table was now conference central. But we did it anyway. We called it Hart and Callahan Capital, a boutique investment firm focused on sustainability, equity, and small businesses often ignored by traditional firms. We had no office, no interns, no fancy glass walls. Just a mission, 2 laptops, and enough shared determination to light up the Rockies. I remember the night we filed our LLC paperwork. Julian looked at the confirmation email, then at me and said, Guess we're really doing this. We are, I whispered, and we're either brilliant or completely out of our minds. He grinned. Let's find out. The days were long. The nights were longer. I split my time between organizing investor decks, teaching myself accounting basics, and temping at an art gallery uptown to help cover rent. Julian worked 16-hour days developing pitch strategies, attending local networking events, and cold calling potential clients. He had a gift with words. I had a gift for order. Together, we kept each other standing. We didn't talk about what was happening between us. Not directly, but something shifted the night the power went out during a snowstorm. We were both still up working, surrounded by notes and Chinese takeout. I went to the window to light a candle. He followed, stopping beside me in the half-dark, the city below glowing under a thick blanket of white. He didn't say anything. He just kissed me, soft, intentional, certain. When he pulled back, he didn't apologize. He just whispered, I've wanted to do that for a long time. We didn't define anything. Not right away. But after that night, it became normal to wake up tangled together on the couch, to pour coffee into mismatched mugs while reviewing investor proposals, to share quiet moments in between chaos that felt more like home than anything I'd known. 6 months later, Julian proposed. No ring, no orchestra, Just us sitting on my living room floor in sweatpants, surrounded by sticky notes and budget projections. "Marry me," he said, looking up from a spreadsheet. "Be my partner in everything." I blinked. "People will say it's too soon." "Let them." I said yes. Our wedding was simple. Just us. A courthouse, my best friend Jesse, who flew in from Philadelphia with a box of tissues, and Julian's brother Marcus. I wore a cream midi dress I found secondhand. Julian wore a charcoal suit with a coffee stain on the cuff he hadn't noticed until after we said our vows. We had dinner at the Vietnamese restaurant where we used to grab lunch during our Meridian days. Mrs. Nguyen, the owner, brought out champagne saved for special people and made us take a picture under the lanterns. That night, we didn't dance or toast with 100 guests. We just held each other on the tiny couch in our apartment, surrounded by half-assembled shelving units and a giant whiteboard that read, "Clients Week 1 Goals." Julian brushed my hair back and said, "This is the beginning, isn't it?" It is. Our beginning wasn't perfect. It was chaotic, messy, underfunded, and exhausting. But it was ours. It was built from the ground up, not handed to us, not stolen from someone else, not built to impress anyone but ourselves. The next 6 months tested every part of our relationship. We fought over money, over timing, over whether to expand too quickly or wait. Julian wanted to reinvest everything back into the business. I wanted to keep enough in reserve to survive slow months. We slammed doors. We went silent for 2 days. But in the end, we always returned to the table, tired, humbled, and ready to compromise. "I'm not afraid of risk," I told him one night, "but I'm also not afraid to protect what we've built." And he listened. That was the difference. He listened. Our first big break came from a small clean energy company in Boulder. They were looking for investors who didn't just see them as a quick return. Julian worked on the pitch for 3 weeks. I designed the decks, formatted the reports, even created mock-ups of their long-term impact using data visualizations I'd learned on YouTube at 2 a.m. They said yes. Then they told 3 of their partners. Momentum arrived like a rising tide. We didn't celebrate with champagne. We celebrated with spring rolls and cheap wine in coffee mugs. "To our first real client," Julian toasted. "To surviving the worst nights," I added. "To my brilliant wife," he said, raising his cup, "who never stopped believing in this, even when I almost did." That night, I realized something had shifted again. We weren't just surviving. We were building a life, a business, a love that grew in between the cracks left by what others had broken. And for the first time since leaving Asheville, I didn't feel like I was running anymore. I felt like I was home. 3 years passed. Our company outgrew the apartment first, then the co-working space, then the tiny office above the bakery with the leaky pipes. By the time we signed the lease on our downtown space, a sleek, light-filled suite with glass walls and an actual reception desk, we had 10 full-time employees, a client roster stretching across 3 states, and a reputation for doing things differently. Julian handled vision and outreach. I handled everything else: systems, hiring, operations, risk management. Together, we built something that felt solid, respected, real. People started noticing. So did the industry. One crisp fall morning, as I was reviewing Q3 numbers, Julian slid a folded financial magazine across the breakfast table. "You might want to see this." I glanced down at the small headline in the corner. "Davis and Associates faces bankruptcy after failed expansion." The name hit me like a brick to the chest. I hadn't thought of them in months, maybe longer. But there it was. Davis. Lila's law firm. The same firm she had built with Daniel after he left his previous firm to join her post-graduation. After he left me, I tried to keep my voice even. "I didn't know you followed legal news out of Asheville." "I don't," Julian said, tone careful. "But their firm handles compliance for Meridian Group." That got my attention. Meridian's on our shortlist for sustainable portfolio acquisition, he continued. We've been vetting them for 2 quarters. I stared at the page. It didn't feel real. A lifetime ago, I'd walked out of Daniel's apartment and left everything behind. Now his company's collapse might bring him straight back into mine, through the front doors of the business I'd built from scratch. Julian watched me closely. I wanted you to hear it from me before the office starts buzzing. They're connected to Meridian? Daniel is Meridian's compliance officer. Lila's firm is their primary legal contractor. Or was. The irony burned, but it didn't sting. Not anymore. Does it change the acquisition plans? I asked. That depends on you. I blinked. You'd walk away from the deal just for me? If you needed me to, he said simply. And that, more than anything, reminded me why I'd said yes to him. Why I'd trusted him when I didn't trust anyone else. Don't be ridiculous, I said, quietly reaching for his hand. It's just business. The deal moved forward. 2 weeks later, it was official. Hart and Callahan Capital would acquire Meridian's sustainable energy portfolio and integrate it under our firm. Meridian would maintain its brand, but operate under our leadership structure. Daniel would remain in his role, now reporting indirectly to one of our regional directors. Technically, he worked for me, and I wasn't the only one who noticed. Let's host a gala, Julian suggested one evening as we reviewed the quarterly report. I raised an eyebrow. We don't usually celebrate acquisitions. This one feels personal, he said with a knowing look. Plus, it's a great excuse to showcase our impact to new investors, and to formally welcome the Meridian team into the fold. I hesitated. Julian leaned forward. Invite them, Nina. All of them. Lila. Daniel. Your mother, if you want. My chest tightened. You think that's a good idea? I think it's time they saw what you've built. Not for revenge. For recognition. I sat in silence, the weight of the past creeping up behind my shoulders. I don't want them to think I'm flaunting success. They won't, Julian said gently. They'll see a woman who left, rebuilt, and became more than they ever imagined. That night, I pulled out my laptop. The gala would be hosted at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science, our favorite venue, sustainable, elegant, full of quiet wonder. I reviewed guest lists, vendor quotes, floral options, all while drafting 3 invitations I never expected to write. Lila Callahan, Daniel Brooks, Margaret Callahan, each with a note attached hand-signed, looking forward to showing you the life I've built. Nina Callahan Hart, I didn't know what I was chasing, not exactly. Closure? Maybe. Peace? Possibly. I only knew I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't the girl outside the kitchen door, heart breaking over words never meant for her ears. I was a woman with a voice, and it was time to let them hear it. The gala night arrived like the quiet before a storm, too calm, too perfect. The museum had never looked more stunning. Under soft amber lighting, the vaulted ceilings shimmered above a sea of linen-draped tables, lush green centerpieces, and display screens showcasing our portfolio impact. Community solar projects, female-led startups, refugee-owned bakeries we'd helped fund. This was the world we'd built. Equal parts beautiful and deliberate. Julian adjusted his cufflinks. Nervous. I took a breath. No, I said. Not anymore. Because this wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about them. It was about stepping fully into the life I'd created, without apology, without permission. Guests began arriving in waves. Local politicians, sustainability influencers, industry leaders. We greeted them with practiced warmth, answered the same 5 questions a dozen times. How did you grow so quickly? What's next for Hart and Callahan? Will you expand nationally? Then I saw them. They entered as a unit, just like the old days. My mother in navy silk, face tight with performance. Lila beside her in a cream sheath dress, hair pinned immaculately, eyes scanning the room like it owed her something. and Daniel, slower, more careful, trailing just behind, the lines in his face deeper than I remembered. They didn't see me right away, which was perfect. I watched them make their way around the gallery space, Lila's practiced smile faltering as she failed to find familiar faces. Daniel looked smaller than I remembered. My mother smiled tightly at the curated displays, clearly trying to decide if this event exceeded or fell short of her expectations. Let them wonder. Julian and I remained by the entrance, chatting with the mayor about sustainable city development. It wasn't until my mother turned toward us that recognition finally hit her. She stopped mid-sentence, her smile freezing like a glitch in motion. "Nina," she gasped, stepping forward. I didn't flinch. I didn't offer a hug. I extended my hand, politely. "Mother, I'm glad you could make it." She recovered quickly, air-kissing the space beside my cheek. "You look radiant." Julian stepped forward. Julian Hart, co-founder and CEO. My mother's smile twitched. "Ah, yes, the husband." "Yes," Julian replied smoothly, "and partner in every sense." Lila extended her hand next. "You've done well for yourself." "Thanks," I replied evenly. "We've done well together." She blinked, as if realizing the wording wasn't an accident. Daniel offered a half nod. "Nina." I returned the gesture with practiced calm. "Daniel." Julian's tone shifted slightly. "We're happy to welcome Meridian to the Hart and Callahan family." Daniel paled. Lila's eyes narrowed. "Oh," she said, "you're the parent company." "Yes," I said quietly. "We closed the deal last month." I saw it register, the new hierarchy, the silent shift in status. Daniel's role, now, sat under a brand with my name on the door. "Please," Julian said, gesturing toward the atrium, "enjoy the evening. Dinner will be served shortly." We moved away, but I could feel their eyes burning through my back the entire time. During dinner, I gave a short welcome speech. I thanked our team, our clients, and the communities that had trusted us. I ended with a note about sustainable legacies. How true success comes not from chasing the loudest victories, but from building quietly and purposefully, one choice at a time. Julian followed with the announcement about Meridian's integration. Cameras flashed. Applause echoed. Daniel's name was mentioned once in passing as part of the compliance team. When we sat back down, my hands were steady. Later, at the dessert table, my mother approached again. "I always knew you'd do something big," she said, as if rewriting history mid-sentence. "Did you?" She tilted her head. "You always had potential. You just needed direction." "No," I said calmly. "I needed belief. You gave that to Lila. I gave it to myself." She sipped her champagne. "Lila and Daniel are going through a rough time. Maybe you could speak to Julian about—" "No," I said softly. Her eyes narrowed. "You would deny your own family support?" "I didn't say that," I said. "I'm no longer the person who lets guilt override boundaries." She didn't speak again. A while later, Lila found me near the courtyard doors. "Your husband is—" "Impressive," she said flatly. I smiled. "Yes, he is. He speaks about you like you run the company." "I do." There was a pause. "You know," she added with brittle poise, "we were happy for a while." "I believe that," I said gently. "But happiness built on someone else's pain never lasts." She blinked, maybe from the truth, maybe from surprise. "You always wanted to be seen as stronger, Lila," I continued. "But the truth is, I didn't need to steal someone else's story to write mine." She walked away without another word. As the evening wound down and the lights dimmed to a golden hush, Julian slipped his hand into mine. "How do you feel?" he asked. I exhaled. "Lighter," I said, like I finally put something down that I didn't realize I was still carrying. He nodded. "They seemed smaller than you remembered." I smiled faintly. "No, I just got bigger." The house was quiet when we got home. Julian loosened his tie and tossed his jacket onto the back of a chair. I kicked off my heels and padded into the kitchen, pulling the leftover chocolate mousse from the fridge. We ate it standing up, sharing the container with 2 spoons, leaning against the counter under warm pendant lights. "So," Julian said, watching me closely, "now that it's over, how do you really feel?" I paused, not triumphant, not angry, not even smug. "Free," I said, finally, like I finally stopped waiting for something I didn't realize I still wanted, an apology maybe, or recognition, or just for them to say I mattered. I set down my spoon, but tonight I realized I don't need it anymore. I don't need anything from them. Julian smiled softly. That's what healing looks like. I looked at him, at this man who had stood beside me through every fragile beginning, every unsure step. He never needed me to be perfect. He never compared. He just chose me, over and over. And I realized something. If Lila had never taken Daniel, if my mother had never pushed me aside, if I had been the daughter she praised, the girlfriend he married, I might never have left. I might have stayed in that suffocating town, working a small gallery job, trying to please a family who only loved me when I fit their mold. I might have spent a lifetime shrinking myself into someone they could accept. But they betrayed me, and in doing so, they set me free. I looked around the kitchen, our kitchen. It wasn't grand. It wasn't a palace, but every inch of it had been earned. Every light fixture, every coffee stain on the countertop, every framed print from my old art school days, it was all real. It was all mine. Do you think they regret it? I asked softly. Julian didn't answer right away. "I think," he said eventually, "they regret who you became without them. Not because they miss you, but because they can't claim credit." That landed deeper than I expected. Because he was right. They didn't want my happiness. They wanted control over it. And when they lost that, they lost their grip on me entirely. I took his hand. "Thank you," I said, "for never making me feel like I had to prove I was worthy." "You never had to," he said simply. "I saw you from the beginning." I rested my head on his shoulder. In the silence, I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who stood outside that kitchen door, listening to her mother rewrite her future in real time. She would have cried. She would have begged. She would have tried to hold on, but I had let her go long ago. And now, standing in the home I built with the man who chose me for everything I am, not despite my softness, but because of it, I knew the most powerful thing I'd ever done wasn't leaving them behind. It was not becoming like them, because I could have retaliated. I could have flaunted my success. I could have crushed them with status and title, and look at me now. But instead, I stood there, calm, gracious whole. And when they looked at me, they didn't see revenge. They saw a life that no longer needed them. And that was the loudest silence I could ever give them. I squeezed Julian's hand. "Let's go to bed." He smiled. "Long day of empire building tomorrow?" "No," I said. "Long day of painting." He blinked. "You're painting again." I nodded. "Started last week. Nothing big. Just something for the hallway. Will I get to see it?" "Eventually." And I meant it, because I was no longer trying to prove myself. Not to anyone. I was simply creating again, out of joy, not pain. That night, as I climbed into bed beside the man I chose and who chose me back, I realized I had finally reclaimed everything they tried to take: my voice, my peace, my power, and above all, myself.